I am Sienna and I am 34 years old. After 7 years without children, my ex-husband abandoned me. He cut off all support and left me completely alone. The lonely former sheriff next door made an unexpected offer. 6 months later, I was pregnant with two beautiful twins. I was surrounded by a highly exclusive celebrity medical team. My ex turned pale when he discovered the absolute truth. He finally learned the sheriff was not who he seemed. Before I continue this story, let me know your location. Please tell me where you are watching from right now. Leave a comment below and hit that like button today. Subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by your family. The crystal chandeliers of the Atlanta Country Club burned brightly. They cast a warm golden glow over 50 elite guests. We were gathered in the private dining room that evening. It was supposed to be our 7th wedding anniversary celebration. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver champagne trays. I wore a tailored emerald gown selected specifically for tonight. Marcus always cared deeply about how we presented ourselves publicly. My husband was a prominent lawyer preparing a mayoral campaign. Every detail of this evening was curated for his image. I sat beside him at the center table, forcing smiles. The wives of city council members offered their polite congratulations. Wealthy donors shook his hand and praised his political vision. I thought this elaborate dinner was a celebration of us. I was completely wrong about his intentions for the night. Marcus stood up and tapped a spoon against his glass. The gentle chime instantly silenced the conversations in the room. Everyone turned their attention eagerly to the man in charge. I looked up at him, expecting a rehearsed romantic speech. I waited for words about love and our lasting partnership. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his tailored suit. He pulled out a thick manila envelope with no expression. He dropped it onto the white linen tablecloth facing me. The heavy thud seemed to echo loudly in the quiet. I stared at the envelope, feeling a sudden icy chill. "What is this, Marcus?" I asked in a quiet whisper. He looked down at me with eyes devoid of warmth. "Those are divorce papers, Sienna," he announced clearly and coldly. His voice carried across the silent room to every guest. He ensured every politician and socialite heard his next words. "I need a wife who can provide a fertile heir. My mayoral campaign and my legacy require a healthy child. I do not need a barren woman holding me back." The collective gasp from the guests sucked away my breath. I sat frozen, unable to process the cruelty happening now. 7 years of marriage were erased in one ruthless sentence. My hands trembled uncontrollably in my lap under the table. I looked around the room, hoping someone would intervene quickly. I prayed someone would tell him he had gone far. But these wealthy people were his donors and his allies. They simply watched my public humiliation with morbid, silent curiosity. I had spent 7 grueling years undergoing painful fertility treatments. I took hormone injections that severely wrecked my physical body. I cried myself to sleep alone in empty guest rooms. Marcus had never once offered me any genuine emotional comfort. He treated my supposed infertility as a personal masculine insult. Now he was using my deepest trauma as a stunt. He cast himself as a tragic figure needing to transition. He wanted sympathy for moving on for the greater good. I looked back at the divorce papers resting beside me. They lay perfectly aligned next to my untouched dinner plate. This absolute humiliation was meticulously designed to break my spirit. He wanted me to cry and beg in front of everyone. He wanted to play the leader handling an unstable wife. I refused to give him that pathetic satisfaction here tonight. I slowly stood up and pushed my heavy chair back. The loud scraping sound cut through the thick, heavy silence. I picked up my clutch and looked directly at him. "You will get your divorce, Marcus," I said, perfectly steady. "But you will also get exactly what you truly deserve." The silence in the room became even more suffocating then. Nobody dared to speak or look away from the scene. Marcus smirked slightly, as if my composure was a joke. He straightened his tie and turned back to his audience. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. My emerald gown swept against the plush carpet with purpose. I held my head high despite the tears threatening me. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes burning my back. The heavy oak doors of the dining room loomed ahead. I pushed them open and stepped into the cool hallway. The air conditioning hit my flushed face like ice water. I walked past the valet stand without stopping for help. I needed the cold night air to clear my mind. I reached my car and finally let the tears fall. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain could ever. I had dedicated my entire life to supporting his ambitions. I managed his schedule and entertained his difficult political clients. I smiled through the endless galas and the tedious fundraisers. I did it all while battling the heartbreak of infertility. And he had discarded me like a broken, useless tool. My phone buzzed in my purse with a new notification. It was a message from my mother-in-law, Vivian. I opened it with a growing sense of absolute dread. Do not cause a scene and accept the settlement gracefully. The message read with all her usual cold, dripping arrogance. Our family has an image to maintain during this campaign. We cannot afford any scandalous behavior from a bitter ex. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat in disgust. The entire family had known about this cruel public ambush. A sharp tap on my car window broke through my rising anger. I wiped my face and looked up closely. Chloe peered through the glass with a smirk. Beside her stood Vivian. My mother-in-law looked like she just stepped off a church pedestal. I rolled down the window slightly, feeling the cool air rush inside. Chloe leaned down, resting her hands on her swollen pregnant belly. She made sure her massive diamond ring caught the harsh parking lot lights. "Come on, Sienna, do not be a sore loser," she crooned with fake sympathy. "You should just walk away gracefully and let Marcus build his political empire. Our family has superior genetics, and we cannot let a broken branch ruin the tree." She patted her stomach, flaunting the child she carried for his older brother. "I am giving this family heirs while your body is a useless wasteland. It is just natural selection doing its job, so step aside for the real women." Her cruel words were designed to hit my deepest and most painful vulnerabilities. Chloe always used her fertility as a weapon against me in this house. She loved reminding everyone a white woman was securing this black family legacy. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white under the streetlights. "You are a disgusting person, Chloe," I said in a low, steady whisper. Vivian shoved her daughter-in-law aside and leaned closer to the open window. Her perfectly styled hair did not move in the evening breeze. "Enough of this pathetic whining, Sienna," she commanded with the authority of a church matriarch. "We do not have time to indulge your emotional instability tonight." She pulled a legal document from her handbag and shoved it through the window. It landed squarely on my lap, right next to my buzzing phone. I stared down at the paper, recognizing the format immediately. It was a quitclaim deed for the beautiful suburban house I had paid for. "What is this, Vivian?" I asked, looking up into her cold, unforgiving eyes. "My entire life savings went into the down payment for that house. Marcus did not contribute a dime to the mortgage for the last 5 years. That house is a marital asset, and Marcus needs it," Vivian stated flatly. "A politician must have a respectable residence to host important campaign events. You will sign your rights away tonight and leave the keys in the mailbox. If you think you can fight my son in court, you are severely mistaken." I shook my head in disbelief at their staggering greed and boundless audacity. "You cannot just steal my home because your son wants to be the mayor. I will hire a lawyer tomorrow, and I will drag Marcus through a brutal public trial. I will show the entire city of Atlanta exactly how the great Marcus treats his wife." Vivian let out a sharp laugh that echoed loudly across the empty pavement. "You will do no such thing, little girl," she threatened, leaning dangerously close. "I am the head of the Women Council at the largest megachurch in this state. My endorsement can make or break any political candidate or any small local business. I built your health counseling clinic by referring my wealthy congregation members to you. I can destroy your entire career with one single phone call by tomorrow morning." She was absolutely right, and the realization made my stomach drop instantly. Vivian wielded immense social power within the elite circles of Atlanta society. If I fought back now, she would use her church influence to crush me. She would brand me a bitter, barren, and mentally unstable ex-wife seeking revenge. My professional reputation as a health counselor would be permanently ruined before lunch. Sign the paper, Sienna Vivian ordered, tapping a finger against the car door. Sign the paper, or I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will tell everyone you had a mental breakdown and tried to ruin Marcus. Nobody will ever hire a crazy woman to counsel them on health and wellness. Chloe nodded eagerly in agreement. Just sign it and disappear, Sienna. We have a campaign to run and babies to raise. My mind raced frantically looking for any possible way out of this trap. I was cornered by a family with limitless resources and zero moral boundaries. I had no money to fight a prolonged legal battle against a powerful political machine. I had no connections willing to stand against Vivian and her mega-church army. They held all the cards tonight and they knew exactly how to play them. I picked up a pen from my center console, feeling the heavy weight of defeat. I stared at the quitclaim deed, knowing I was signing away my only financial security. The house I had spent years renovating and decorating was gone with one stroke. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. I handed the document back to Vivian, feeling a piece of my soul die. Good girl, Vivian said, snatching the paper with a triumphant smile. Now give me the house keys and drive far away from our family. You have until midnight to pack your bags and vacate the property entirely. Do not take anything valuable, or I will press charges for theft against you. I unclipped my house keys from the ring and dropped them into her outstretched palm. Chloe laughed softly, turning away to walk back toward the country club entrance. See you never, Sienna? She called over her shoulder, waving one hand dismissively. Vivian gave me one last look of pure disgust before following her daughter-in-law. I watched them walk away carrying the deed to my home and my future. I was left with absolutely nothing but my car and a few short hours to pack. I finally started the engine, feeling a new resolve slowly replacing my deep despair. I drove back to the sprawling suburban house that was no longer mine. A torrential downpour washed over the city streets. I had exactly 2 hours before midnight to erase 7 years of my life. I ran up the grand staircase and grabbed the smallest suitcase from the closet. I packed only my essential clothing and the few personal documents I could find. I left the expensive jewelry sitting on the vanity. I wanted absolutely nothing that tied me to his fake political image or his cruel family. The rain lashed aggressively against the bedroom windows as I zipped the suitcase shut. I walked through the quiet hallways, listening to the empty echoes. I left the keys on the kitchen counter exactly as Vivian had commanded me. I walked out the front door and let the heavy rain soak my emerald gown. I loaded my single suitcase into the trunk of my car and drove away into the stormy night. I had nowhere to go, except a rundown cabin on the outskirts of the city. My late mother had left it to me years ago, but it had sat empty and neglected. It was a small wooden shack surrounded by overgrown weeds and old towering oak trees. I gripped the steering wheel tightly as the rain blinded my view of the dark, winding road. The engine sputtered, making a terrible grinding sound under the hood. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard right before the car jerked violently. I pumped the gas pedal, but the engine simply died, leaving me stranded in the pitch-black darkness. I was only a few hundred yards away from the cabin driveway, but the car refused to move. I hit the steering wheel in frustration and let out a loud scream. I grabbed my purse and pushed the door open against the wind. I stepped out into the freezing rain and popped the trunk to retrieve my luggage. The heavy suitcase hit the muddy ground, soaking my dress in dirty water. I stood alone in the dark storm, feeling the crushing weight of the entire night finally collapse on me. Suddenly, a bright beam of light cut through the intense darkness. A pickup truck pulled up behind my stalled vehicle. I shielded my eyes from the glaring headlights and took a cautious step backward. The door opened and a tall man stepped out into the heavy rain. He wore a faded flannel shirt and dark denim jeans. His broad shoulders blocked the blinding light as he walked steadily toward me. He was older, perhaps 45 years old, with striking silver hair that gleamed softly. His rugged face carried lines of experience and quiet authority. He held a large flashlight in one hand and stopped a few feet away. You look like you need help tonight, he said in a low, rumbling voice. His tone was gentle despite his intimidating physical presence. I am Elias Thorne, he added, gesturing toward the dirt road. I live right next to your cabin. I stared at him, shivering in my ruined gown. I am Sienna, I replied, wrapping my arms around my freezing body. My car completely died on me. Elias looked at my muddy suitcase and soaked dress. He did not ask invasive questions or offer pity, popped my car hood open and inspected the engine briefly. The alternator is completely fried, he explained, wiping rainwater from his brow. This car is not moving tonight without a tow truck. I let out a defeated sigh. This was the absolute worst ending to a devastating night. I bent down to pick up my suitcase, but my frozen fingers slipped. Elias stepped forward and effortlessly lifted the large bag with one hand. Get into my truck, he ordered firmly, guiding me toward the passenger side. You are freezing to death and the cabin has no power. I will drive you over and help get the generator running. I was too exhausted to argue with the silver-haired stranger offering a lifeline. I climbed into the warm truck and buckled my seatbelt. Elias placed my suitcase in the back and slid into the driver's seat. He turned the heater on, high, and handed me a dry towel. I wrapped the towel around my shoulders, feeling a sudden wave of gratitude. As Elias shifted the truck into drive, my phone began to vibrate violently. Inside my purse, I pulled it out and saw Marcus calling. The screen flashed his name brightly in the dark cabin. I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten with anxiety and rage. I should not answer it, I whispered aloud. He just wants to twist the knife deeper. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but Elias gently reached across the center console. Let me handle this, Sienna, he said softly. I was too stunned to protest, as he took the phone from my trembling hand and pressed the accept button. He put the call on speaker so I could hear everything. Well, look, who is finally in the slums? Marcus gloated, his voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. I hope you enjoy your new pathetic life in that rotting shack, Sienna. It is exactly where a useless, barren woman like you belongs. Do not ever think about coming back to my city. Elias did not raise his voice or show any emotion. He simply leaned closer to the phone microphone. His eyes turned dangerously cold in the dashboard light. Listen to me very carefully, boy, Elias said in a chilling, deadpan whisper that radiated pure, absolute menace. If you ever contact this woman again, I will personally come downtown and break every single bone in your perfectly manicured political body. The line went completely dead silent. Marcus did not utter another word. He simply hung up the phone in absolute terror. Elias calmly handed the device back to me. You are completely safe right now, Sienna, he promised, steering the truck toward the old cabin. We pulled into the overgrown driveway of my mother's old property as freezing rain pounded the windshield. Elias grabbed his toolbox and effortlessly carried my suitcase onto the porch. He spent the next hour replacing fuses and coaxing the rusty generator to life until warm light flooded the dusty living room. I thanked him, but he just offered a polite nod and promised to check the car engine tomorrow, before walking back into the storm. I slept on a lumpy sofa, wrapped in moth-eaten quilts, but felt absolute peace. The suffocating weight of Marcus and his toxic family was finally gone. Over the next 3 weeks, I scrubbed hardwood floors, painted walls, and transformed the neglected cabin into a sanctuary. I poured my energy into drafting a business plan for my independent women's health counseling clinic. I wanted to help other women navigate the trauma I endured for 7 long years. I found a modest commercial space downtown and submitted my loan applications to a prominent local bank. Everything finally seemed to be falling perfectly and seamlessly into place for my fresh start and my beautiful new life of independence. Across the city, Marcus officially launched his mayoral campaign with a highly publicized gala. He plastered his deceitful smile across massive billboards and television screens throughout the Atlanta area. His polished campaign slogan promised a return to traditional family values and rapid economic growth. Vivian mobilized her church congregation to knock on doors and hand out expensive flyers, praising her flawless son, Chloe, stood behind him at every press conference, deliberately pushing her pregnant belly into the camera frame to project domestic bliss. They sold the city a pristine image of Black excellence built entirely on absolute lies. I watched his inaugural speech on my television, feeling intensely disgusted by his blatant hypocrisy. He spoke passionately about supporting local businesses and uplifting vulnerable communities. In reality, he was already orchestrating shady backroom deals with ruthless corporate developers to line his political pockets. His cornerstone campaign promise was a massive commercial revitalization project on the wooded outskirts of the city. He promised to bring luxury retail spaces and high-end residential towers to a neglected industrial zone. The massive mega project would easily secure him millions in campaign donations and guarantee his landslide victory. But Marcus suddenly encountered a massive, unprecedented logistical nightmare when his highly paid surveyors mapped out the proposed commercial zone. He and Chloe sat in his plush downtown campaign office, reviewing the complex zoning maps spread across his large mahogany desk. The luxury developers required a massive, continuous plot of land to build their flagship shopping center and luxury condos. However, there was one small residential parcel sitting dead center in their designated prime access route, blocking everything. The developers absolutely refused to sign the multi-million-dollar contract until Marcus legally secured that specific plot of land. Marcus angrily demanded the name of the stubborn property owner, holding up his entire political empire and his future wealth. Chloe typed the parcel number into the county property database and froze in absolute sheer shock. The worthless, rotting shack in the woods, where they had gleefully banished me, was the exact property holding their entire commercial project hostage. They had forced me to sign away a pristine suburban mansion, but my mother's neglected cabin was now the most valuable piece of real estate in the entire county. Marcus paced his office in a furious, blind rage, realizing the bitter cosmic irony of his own cruel actions. He desperately needed my land to secure his mayoral victory, but he knew I would never willingly sell it to him. Chloe quickly formulated a ruthless, vicious strategy to force my hand without directly asking me for a political favor. She maliciously reminded Marcus that I was currently trying to launch my independent counseling clinic and desperately needed startup capital. If they could completely cut off my financial oxygen, I would eventually become desperate enough to sell the cabin for pennies just to survive. Marcus immediately picked up his private phone and called his wealthiest, most influential campaign donors. He reached out to the executive board members of the exact bank currently processing my commercial loan application. He heavily leveraged his future political power and promised them lucrative city contracts if they did him a small personal favor. He painted me as a mentally unstable, bitter ex-wife who was a massive financial liability and a terrible credit risk. He aggressively instructed them to freeze my accounts and deny any credit applications indefinitely until he gave them the green light. I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing paint swatches for my new clinic, waiting for the loan approval call. The bank manager had previously assured me my excellent credit score made the loan a guarantee. When my phone rang, I answered with a bright, hopeful smile. The manager sounded incredibly tense. He awkwardly informed me that upper management had reviewed my file and permanently declined my application. He falsely claimed my debt-to-income ratio was unacceptable and abruptly hung up the phone. I stared at the blank screen, feeling a cold wave of panic wash over me. I logged into my online banking portal and discovered my business checking account was completely frozen, pending a corporate review. My entire business plan was crumbling into dust before my eyes. The clinic I dreamed of opening was now financially impossible. It did not take a genius to figure out who had orchestrated this financial blockade. Marcus was using his political tentacles to strangle my independence and starve me out of my sanctuary. He wanted me broken, destitute, and crawling back to beg for mercy. He wanted to strip away my dignity, so I would surrender my mother's land to his developers. He deeply underestimated my fierce resilience. I slammed my laptop shut and took a steady breath. If Marcus wanted to play a ruthless and brutal game of financial warfare, he was about to quickly learn I was absolutely no longer playing by his corrupt rules. I spent the next morning surrounded by half-open paint cans and unpacked medical supplies inside my partially renovated clinic space. The frozen bank accounts meant I could no longer afford the professional contractors I had carefully hired just a week ago. Every dollar I had left was stretched dangerously thin across my limited credit limits. I refused to let Marcus and his ruthless political machine crush my dreams of opening this health counseling center. I tied my hair back into a tight bun and picked up a heavy paint roller, deciding to finish the waiting room walls myself. I was fiercely determined to open the doors by the end of the month, even if I had to manually lay every single floorboard on my hands and knees. I was not entirely alone in this exhausting physical endeavor. Elias had shown up shortly after sunrise wearing his faded denim jeans and a worn-out leather tool belt. He had noticed my car leaving the dark cabin early and quietly followed me into the city. He did not ask any invasive questions about my suddenly vanished construction crew or my stressed demeanor. He simply walked into the dusty commercial space, grabbed a heavy toolbox, and started fixing the exposed plumbing in the back examination room. The quiet, rhythmic sound of his wrench clinking against the metal pipes was surprisingly comforting. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic emotional warfare I had endured with my ex-husband. Elias possessed a grounded, steady energy that made me feel incredibly safe and deeply respected. I was struggling to reach the upper corner of the drywall when the loud screech of luxury tires echoed aggressively from the street outside. A pristine white Mercedes SUV sharply parked directly over the curb, blocking the front walkway. The driver door swung open and Chloe stepped out wearing a tailored designer maternity dress and oversized dark sunglasses. She looked around the working-class neighborhood with an expression of sheer absolute disgust. She carefully navigated the cracked sidewalk as if the concrete itself might somehow infect her with poverty. The brass bell above my clinic door chimed sharply, announcing her completely unwelcome arrival. Chloe stepped into the unfinished reception area, waving a manicured hand in front of her face to clear away the construction dust. "Oh my goodness, Sienna," she coughed dramatically, adjusting her expensive leather handbag on her shoulder. "This place is an absolute biohazard. I cannot believe the city actually permits anyone to occupy this decaying rat trap. Is this what your miserable life has been reduced to?" I slowly lowered my paint roller and wiped my sweaty forehead with the back of my wrist. I stared at my former sister-in-law, feeling a familiar surge of cold defensive anger rising in my throat. "You are trespassing on private property, Chloe," I stated firmly, holding my ground. "I suggest you turn around and walk back to whatever country club you just crawled out of. I am extremely busy building a legitimate business, and I do not have time for your childish high society games today." Chloe laughed, a high-pitched grating sound that echoed unpleasantly off the bare plaster walls. "A legitimate business," she mocked, stepping further into the room and running a judgmental finger over a dusty reception counter. "Marcus completely froze your pathetic little bank accounts yesterday. We know you are absolutely broke, Sienna. You cannot even afford to pay a proper construction crew to finish this miserable dump. You are practically begging on the streets, and it is honestly humiliating for our pristine family name." She patted her swollen belly with a smug, victorious smile designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. "Marcus is about to become the next mayor of this city, and we simply cannot have his bitter ex-wife living in a rotting shack dragging down his public image. He has a massive commercial project planned for that entire wooded district. Your ugly little cabin is sitting right in the middle of our glorious political future." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, rectangular piece of paper. "Marcus is a generous man, despite your relentless emotional instability," Chloe announced, holding the paper up to the bright light. "He is offering you a highly lucrative way out of your pathetic misery." She casually released her fingers, allowing the document to flutter slowly through the dusty air. The paper landed face up on the dirty paint-splattered floor right at the toe of my work boots. It was a certified cashier check made out to me for exactly $50,000. Pick it up like a good little girl, Chloe sneered, looking down her arrogant nose at me. Sign the property transfer deed for the cabin and use that money to crawl back to whatever insignificant hole you came from. Consider it a charitable donation from the future mayor to a barren, useless woman who has absolutely nothing else to live for. The sheer venom in her words was meticulously designed to break my spirit entirely. I stared down at the check, feeling a hot, burning flush of absolute rage rising in my chest. Before I could formulate a verbal response to her staggering audacity, heavy, purposeful footsteps echoed from the back hallway. Elias stepped out from the shadows of the examination room, holding a massive steel pipe wrench in one large, calloused hand. He wiped a smear of black grease from his jawline using the sleeve of his plaid shirt. His silver hair caught the dusty sunlight filtering through the large front windows. He looked every inch the rugged working-class handyman, but his piercing gray eyes radiated pure, lethal authority. Chloe took an involuntary step backward, her arrogant smile instantly vanishing from her face. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded, trying to regain her wealthy, elitist composure. "Are you the cheap manual labor she hired to fix this garbage dump?" Elias did not answer her immediately. He walked slowly and deliberately, placing his towering physical presence directly between me and Chloe. The sudden shift in the room atmosphere was intensely palpable and heavy with warning. He looked down at the $50,000 check resting in the dust, and then slowly locked his cold gaze onto Chloe. "You have exactly 3 seconds to get out of this building," Elias said in a voice so low and dangerously calm it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Chloe scoffed, attempting to mask her growing terror with loud indignation. "Do you have any idea who I am, you dirty old mechanic? My brother-in-law is Marcus." Elias did not wait for her to finish dropping elite political names. He dropped his wrench onto the counter with a loud, terrifying bang. He took one massive step forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out and grabbed Chloe firmly by the upper arm, completely ignoring her expensive silk maternity dress and her assumed high status. His grip was an iron vice that offered absolutely zero room for negotiation or argument. "Hey, let go of me," Chloe shrieked, struggling vainly against his immovable masculine strength. "You cannot touch me. I will have you arrested right now." Elias physically marched her backward toward the front entrance with relentless, unstoppable momentum. "You are trespassing and you are harassing the business owner of this establishment," he stated coldly, pushing the heavy glass front door wide open. "If you ever show your arrogant face in this neighborhood again, I will personally ensure your precious mayoral candidate answers for criminal harassment charges." He physically shoved her out the door onto the cracked sidewalk. Chloe stumbled awkwardly in her high heels, barely catching her balance, before falling back against the hood of her luxury SUV. She looked back at Elias with wide, terrified eyes, her carefully crafted elite persona completely shattered into pieces. Elias bent down, picked up the $50,000 check, and casually ripped it into tiny shreds. He tossed the shredded pieces out the door, letting the wind scatter them over Chloe and her pristine vehicle. "Do not come back," Elias warned, slamming the heavy glass door securely shut and locking the deadbolt tightly. Elias turned away from the locked door and walked back into the center of the clinic. The aggressive roar of Chloe speeding away in her luxury vehicle faded down the street, leaving us in total silence. I stood frozen in the middle of the room with the paint roller still gripped tightly in my hand. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I had never seen anyone stand up to Marcus and his family like that. They were untouchable political royalty in Atlanta, and Elias had just treated Chloe like absolute garbage on the bottom of his boots. He looked at my pale face and let out a soft sigh. The dangerous intensity in his gray eyes instantly melted away, leaving behind genuine warmth and deep concern. "Are you all right, Sienna?" he asked, his voice returning to that calm, steady rumble. I dropped the paint roller into the plastic tray and nodded slowly. I am fine, I whispered, rubbing my paint-stained hands together. Thank you for doing that, Elias. I was about to throw a can of blue paint over her designer dress, but your method was highly effective. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. He walked over and gently took my hands, looking at my bruised knuckles and exhausted posture. You have been working yourself into the ground all week, he noted quietly. Your bank accounts are frozen, and you are fighting a political machine entirely alone. You need to stop painting for today. I shook my head stubbornly. I cannot stop Elias. If I do not finish this clinic, they win. Marcus wins. Elias did not argue with my defiance. He simply reached out and untied the apron from my waist. You are not quitting, he corrected firmly. You are just taking a strategic pause to refuel your body. Go wash the paint off your face, Sienna. I am taking you back to the cabin and I am cooking you a proper dinner tonight. The sheer exhaustion suddenly hit me like a massive brick wall. I lacked the energy to protest against his commanding but gentle tone. I washed my hands and followed him out to his rusted pickup truck. The drive back to the suburban woods was quiet and peaceful. When we arrived at my mother-old cabin, Elias did not hesitate. He walked straight into my small kitchen, rolled up his plaid sleeves, and opened the refrigerator. Within minutes, he was expertly chopping vegetables and searing seasoned chicken in a cast-iron skillet. I sat at the small wooden dining table watching him work with quiet fascination. The contrast between this rugged older man and my polished politician ex-husband was staggering. Marcus would never step foot in a kitchen unless there were photographers present to document his fake domestic bliss. Marcus viewed acts of service as beneath his elite status. Elias performed them with effortless, masculine grace. He set a steaming plate of roasted chicken and garlic vegetables in front of me. He poured 2 glasses of red wine and sat across the table. The rustic cabin felt incredibly warm and safe, filled with the rich aroma of a home-cooked meal. I took a bite and closed my eyes, savoring the delicious flavor. You are a man of many surprising talents, Elias, Burr said softly. Plumber bodyguard, and now a master chef. He chuckled and took a sip of his wine. When you live alone for a long time, you learn how to take care of yourself, he replied. His eyes briefly shadowed, with a hint of old unspoken grief. I lost my wife many years ago. It took me a long time to learn how to exist in a quiet house. I lowered my fork, feeling a deep surge of empathy for the silver-haired man across from me. I am so sorry for your loss, Elias, I whispered sincerely. He nodded appreciatively. Grief changes a person, he said softly. But betrayal transforms you completely. I know your ex-husband hurt you deeply, Sienna. I see the heavy walls you have built around yourself. You are fighting so hard to prove your worth to people who are completely blind to it. I looked down at my glass, feeling the painful sting of his accurate words. Marcus told everyone I was broken. I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. He paraded me around elite doctors for 7 years trying to fix my fertility. Every negative test was treated like my personal failure. His mother Vivian convinced the entire church community that I was cursed. They made me feel like a useless, empty shell. Elias reached across the table and covered my trembling hand with his warm, rough palm. His touch sent a sudden, unexpected spark of electricity up my arm. You are not broken, Sienna, he said with absolute, unwavering certainty. You are the strongest woman I have ever met. You survived 7 years in a toxic snake pit, and you walked away with your dignity intact. Do not let those arrogant parasites define your value. I looked into his piercing gray eyes, feeling a thick emotional wall crumble inside my chest. Marcus always made me feel small and inadequate. Elias made me feel seen and fiercely protected. He leaned back in his chair, maintaining his steady gaze. If you want to build a new life, you have to understand the basic rules of nature, he explained in a low, thoughtful rumble. When a tree is surrounded by toxic soil and dead roots, it cannot thrive. The poison slowly suffocates the life out of it. You have to aggressively clear out all the rot to let the new roots grow. Marcus and his family are the rot sienna. You cannot plant a beautiful new garden until you completely burn their dead weeds to the ground. The evening stretched on as we shared stories of resilience and absolute survival every single night together, pushing us inevitably closer toward beautiful, shocking truths. I woke up before dawn and drove downtown to the sprawling medical complex, where Marcus and I had spent 7 agonizing and grueling years undergoing invasive fertility treatments. The towering glass building cast a long, dark shadow over the street, serving as a cold, physical reminder of my deepest trauma. I entered the basement archives department ringing the silver bell. An older woman emerged from the dusty rows of metal filing cabinets. I recognized her instantly. It was Nurse Martha. She was always the only staff member who offered me a genuinely sympathetic smile or a warm, heated blanket when I shivered violently in the freezing recovery rooms. Nurse Martha stopped dead in her tracks. She dropped her folders, scattering them across the floor. "Sienna," she gasped, her voice trembling with sudden, intense emotion. "I just came to sign the release forms for my medical history transfer." Martha did not reach out to take the papers from my outstretched hand. Instead, she stepped backward. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes that brimmed with unshed tears. Her hands shook violently as she grabbed my wrist. "You are divorced now," she whispered, looking frantically over her shoulder toward the empty hallway. "Marcus is running for mayor, and he publicly discarded you." I nodded, feeling a familiar sting of humiliation. "Yes, Martha, we are divorced." She let out a shaky, ragged breath and pulled me up from the floor. She gripped my arm, dragging me into a small windowless break room, and locked the door. "Martha." "What is going on?" I asked. She paced nervously across the small, dimly lit room, constantly wringing her hands together in sheer panic. "I am retiring next week, Sienna," she confessed, her voice cracking with heavy guilt. "I plan to take this dark secret to my grave, but seeing you here today, I simply cannot stay silent anymore. God will never forgive me if I do not make this right." She pulled a thick, sealed manila envelope from a locker and pushed it into my hands. "This is your actual unedited medical file," she revealed, dropping her gaze to the floor in absolute shame. "The file the doctors gave you and Marcus was a complete, total fabrication." I stared down at the heavy envelope, my heart pounding furiously against my ribs. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "I took thousands of injections." Martha covered her face, weeping openly now. "You never needed a single one of those painful medical treatments, Sienna. You are a perfectly and completely healthy woman. Your reproductive system is absolutely flawless in every single way." I felt the room violently tilt around me. If I am completely healthy, then why did we never manage to conceive a child? I asked out loud, the terrifying and twisted truth already forming darkly in the back of my mind. "Marcus is 100% sterile," Martha sobbed. "He has absolute non-obstructive azoospermia. He cannot produce a single viable sperm cell, and he has known this terrible fact entirely from day one of your marriage." I stopped breathing. The sterile air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thick and suffocating. My mind raced back through 7 years of agonizing physical pain and relentless emotional torture. All the times Chloe mocked my empty womb. All the times Vivian prayed loudly for my barren body in church. All the times Marcus looked at me with cold, bitter disappointment. "Why did the doctors lie?" I yelled, gripping the envelope. "Money and power," Sienna Martha explained, wiping her tear-stained cheeks. "Vivian bribed the chief medical officer with a massive briefcase of untraceable cash. She told the doctors a sterile black politician would be a laughingstock, demanding they alter the records to blame your body instead. She paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to keep the lie alive and subject you to unnecessary, grueling procedures just to maintain his flawless masculine image." I violently ripped the manila envelope open and pulled out the original sealed laboratory reports. There it was, explicitly printed in undeniable, stark black and white clinical medical terminology. My test results were completely normal. Marcus had 0 sperm count, a completely sterile man pretending to be a virile political king. Attached were bank transfer receipts Vivian had systematically wired massive sums to the clinic director. The sheer magnitude of their profound demonic evil crashed over me like a tidal wave. They physically and mentally tortured me for 7 years, poisoning my body with dangerous hormones. They did it all to protect a fragile, arrogant male ego and a fake political narrative. I looked at Martha, feeling a dangerous, burning fire ignite inside my soul. My sadness was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, lethal clarity. "Thank you for giving me this, Martha," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper. "Leave Atlanta tonight. Do not wait for your retirement next week. When I drop this bomb, Marcus and Vivian will destroy anyone in their path." Martha nodded frantically, grabbing her purse from the locker. "I am leaving straight for the airport, Sienna. Please make them pay for what they did to you." I walked out of the clinic, clutching the manila envelope against my chest. I took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, feeling the weight of the last 7 years finally lifting off my shoulders. The bright morning sun blinded me as I stepped onto the busy Atlanta sidewalk. I was not a broken, barren woman discarded by a powerful political dynasty. I was a perfectly healthy woman who had just been handed the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Marcus built his entire mayoral campaign on family values and superior genetics. Chloe was flaunting her pregnancy to elevate their family status. Vivian was using her church influence to preach about divine blessings. They had built a massive, towering empire of absolute lies. Every single speech Marcus gave about family values was a calculated, disgusting performance designed to manipulate the voters of this city. I slowly unlocked my car and tossed the explosive documents onto the passenger seat. I smiled a cold, ruthless smile that mirrored the silver fox who was currently fixing my clinic. Marcus wanted to play a vicious game of public humiliation and destruction. He underestimated my resilience, and he completely misjudged the fierce strength of a woman who has survived absolute hell and clawed her way back. Now I held the absolute power to obliterate his political campaign, his law firm, his masculine pride, and his entire family legacy in one single devastating strike. The crisp autumn air swept through the clinic courtyard, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and fresh coffee. 6 perfectly peaceful months had passed since Elias physically threw Chloe out of my sanctuary. The brutal financial blockade Marcus had orchestrated slowly dissolved as my clinic gained traction through private paying clients and genuine grassroots community support. Word of mouth about my holistic counseling services spread quickly among women who felt entirely ignored by traditional clinical systems. Elias was a constant, steady presence in my daily life now. He helped me hang the final waiting room signs and stayed late to balance my preliminary accounting ledgers. He was no longer just the silver-haired handyman next door. He was my partner, my fierce protector, and my absolute best friend. We spent our evenings cooking together in my mother's small cabin, or sitting quietly on the back porch watching the sunset over the distant tree line. I had never experienced this level of calm, unwavering affection. Marcus always demanded high society performance and strict perfection. Elias simply wanted me to exist and be happy. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the clinic was completely fully booked. I was consulting with a young mother about postpartum anxiety when a sudden, overwhelming wave of dizziness crashed over me. The small, bright room violently tilted on its axis. A sharp metallic ringing echoed loudly in my ears, drowning out the client's voice. I gripped the edge of my wooden desk, desperately trying to anchor myself against the aggressive spinning sensation. "Sienna, are you all right?" the young woman asked, leaning forward with deep concern in her eyes. "You look incredibly pale right now." I tried to offer her a reassuring professional smile, but my lips felt completely numb and cold. "I am fine," I whispered, attempting to stand up from my ergonomic chair. "I just need a quick drink of cold water." Before I could take a single step, my vision faded entirely into pitch-black darkness. The heavy floor rushed up to meet me, And the absolute last thing I heard was the loud, frantic sound of my client screaming for help. I woke up blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of an emergency room bay. The sterile, sharp smell of hospital antiseptic instantly flooded my senses, bringing back traumatic, agonizing memories of my past fertility treatments. I tried to sit up, but a strong, warm hand gently pushed my shoulder back down against the thin mattress. "Do not move, Sienna," Elias instructed, his deep, rumbling voice thick with intense worry. "You hit your head pretty hard when you collapsed at the clinic today." I turned my head slowly and saw him sitting close by my bedside. His gray eyes were dark with deep concern, and his large hands gripped mine tightly. He looked exhausted, as if he had run 5 miles to get here. "What happened?" I asked, my voice dry and raspy. "The doctors are running some routine blood tests now," he explained softly, smoothing a stray piece of hair away from my forehead. "You gave us all a massive, terrifying scare, Sienna. Your blood pressure completely bottomed out." I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of frustrating weakness. "It is just pure exhaustion," I murmured, dismissing the severity of the event. "I have been working 70-hour weeks trying to keep the clinic doors open against Marcus and his political games. I just forgot to eat lunch today, Elias." Before he could firmly reprimand me for my relentless workaholic habits, a young female doctor walked into the room holding a digital tablet. She possessed a bright, enthusiastic smile that seemed oddly out of place in a busy, frantic emergency department. "Sienna," the doctor said warmly, stepping up to the foot of my bed. "I am Dr. Hayes. How are you feeling right now?" "Like I was run over by a freight train," I admitted honestly, rubbing my throbbing temples. "It is just extreme fatigue, doctor. I promise I will rest this weekend." Dr. Hayes chuckled softly and tapped her digital tablet screen. "Well, fatigue is certainly a major factor here, Sienna, but it is not from running your clinic. Your blood work results just came back from the lab, and they explain absolutely everything about your sudden fainting spell today." I tensed instinctively, anticipating some terrible, grim diagnosis. My mind raced toward the darkest possible conclusions. Was it a heart condition or severe chronic anemia? Elias squeezed my hand harder, bracing for the medical news alongside me. "Congratulations, Sienna," Dr. Hayes announced brightly, her smile widening further. "You are pregnant." The word hung heavily suspended in the cold, sterile hospital air. Pregnant. It was a completely impossible concept. It was a cruel medical joke. I stared at the doctor, feeling my heart literally stop beating in my chest. "That is completely impossible," I whispered, my voice cracking with absolute terror and disbelief. "I am entirely barren. My ex-husband and I tried for 7 excruciating years. The top fertility specialists in this city told me my body was a complete broken wasteland." "I cannot be pregnant, Dr. Hayes. You must have mixed up my blood work with another patient." The doctor shook her head gently and approached the side of the bed. "There is absolutely no mistake, Sienna. Your HCG levels are incredibly high, which is perfectly consistent with your current state. We performed a rapid bedside ultrasound while you were unconscious just to be completely certain." She turned her tablet screen toward me and Elias. I stared blankly at the grainy black and white image displayed on the glowing screen. There, in the center of the dark space, were 2 distinct, tiny flickering spots. "What are those?" I asked, my breath catching painfully in my throat. "Those are 2 very healthy, strong heartbeats," Dr. Hayes explained softly, pointing a delicate finger at the screen. "You are roughly 8 weeks along, Sienna. You are having twins." I stopped breathing. The sterile walls of the emergency room completely vanished. The traumatic ghost of Vivian dragging me to endless, humiliating doctor appointments faded away entirely. The agonizing memory of Marcus proudly tossing those divorce papers on the table because I could not give him an heir suddenly shattered into a million insignificant pieces. I was not broken. I was not a toxic, barren wasteland. I was a perfectly healthy mother, and I was carrying 2 beautiful living children. A loud, primal sob ripped violently through my throat. I covered my face with my hands, weeping with a profound, intense joy I had never experienced in my entire life. 7 years of profound, agonizing shame and deep self-hatred washed away in a flood of hot, happy tears. Elias wrapped his strong, massive arms around me, pulling me tightly against his broad chest. He buried his face in my hair, holding me with a fierce, protective reverence. "We are having twins," he murmured, his deep voice thick with absolute wonder and deep emotion. "You are perfect, Sienna. You have always been absolutely perfect." I clung to him, burying my tear-stained face in his warm flannel shirt. I was finally truly fiercely alive, and nobody could ever take this beautiful miracle away from me. The morning sun felt entirely different as Elias and I walked out of the hospital through the sliding glass doors. The air was no longer a suffocating reminder of medical failures, but a crisp promise of a beautiful future. Elias kept his arm wrapped securely around my waist, guiding me toward his truck with gentle protective care. I held a large manila envelope containing the ultrasound printouts tightly against my chest. Inside that envelope was the undeniable visual proof of my two tiny miracles. I felt a radiant, glowing warmth spreading through my entire body. We were smiling and talking quietly about setting up a nursery in the old cabin. We were completely unaware that a pair of malicious eyes was watching our every move from across the busy hospital parking lot. Chloe was sitting inside her pristine white Mercedes SUV parked in the VIP section of the hospital lot. She had just finished her own highly publicized luxury prenatal appointment. She was aggressively tapping her manicured nails against her leather steering wheel when she suddenly spotted us. Her sharp eyes locked onto my glowing face and the protective way Elias held me. She noticed the slight but unmistakable swell of my stomach beneath my fitted coat. Chloe immediately snatched her phone from the center console and zoomed in on us with the camera lens. Her thumb rapidly pressed the capture button, snapping dozens of high-resolution photos. She zoomed in on the ultrasound envelope in my hand. She zoomed in on Elias wearing his faded flannel shirt and rugged boots. Her mind instantly began spinning a dark, vicious web of absolute lies. Chloe did not see a woman who had finally found happiness after years of profound abuse. She saw a massive political threat and a golden opportunity to destroy me permanently. She immediately drafted a mass message and attached the most compromising photos she had just taken. She sent the images directly to Vivian and the elite women council of their megachurch. Chloe knew exactly how to manipulate the narrative to serve her wealthy family. Within minutes, her toxic poison began infecting the most influential social circles in Atlanta. The following Sunday, the sprawling fellowship hall of Vivian's megachurch was buzzing with loud, malicious whispers. Vivian and Chloe held court at the center table, sipping expensive tea after the morning service. Chloe casually leaned forward and showed the photos on her phone to the wives of prominent city councilmen and wealthy political donors. "Look at this absolute disgrace," Chloe whispered loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the room. "Sienna is parading around a maternity ward with some filthy low-class mechanic. She is actually pregnant. Can you believe the sheer audacity of this woman?" Vivian clutched her pearl necklace, feigning deep religious shock and profound moral outrage. "We prayed for her barren womb for 7 years." Vivian lamented loudly, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "My poor Marcus spent a fortune on the best doctors trying to fix her broken body. The moment my son divorces her, she magically turns up pregnant by a random stranger. She is clearly a loose woman who has completely lost her moral compass." The wealthy churchwomen gasped and eagerly leaned closer to inspect the photos. The malicious gossip spread through the room like a raging, uncontrollable wildfire. Chloe smiled a cold, calculated smile and delivered her most venomous lie yet. "She is not just a loose woman," Chloe declared, tapping the screen of her phone. "She is a desperate, manipulative extortionist. Sienna knows Marcus is launching his mayoral campaign next month. She got herself pregnant on purpose, just to create a massive public scandal. She is planning to claim the babies belong to Marcus to extort millions of dollars from his campaign fund. She wants to ruin his political career because she is a bitter, jealous failure." The churchwomen gasped again, entirely consuming the toxic narrative Chloe and Vivian were feeding them. They immediately began forwarding the photos to their own extensive contact lists. Within hours, the vicious rumors saturated the elite country clubs, the luxury salons, and the high society dinner parties across Atlanta. The narrative was firmly established and fiercely protected by Vivian's immense social power. Sienna, the barren ex-wife, had lost her mind, slept with a local handyman, and was plotting to extort the future mayor with a fake paternity scandal. I was sitting in my clinic the next morning organizing patient files when the brutal reality of their smear campaign finally reached me. My phone began ringing incessantly, with calls from anonymous numbers and aggressive local journalists. A prominent client canceled her appointment citing uncomfortable rumors she had heard at her Sunday brunch. Olivia, a loyal friend from my past life, forwarded me a screenshot of a private church group chat. The message detailed Chloe's entire fabricated story and included the photos taken outside the hospital. I read the disgusting comments calling me a gold digger, a fraud, and a disgrace to Black excellence. My hands shook with a mixture of deep hurt and rising furious anger. They were not satisfied with stealing my home and destroying my marriage. They were actively trying to ruin the joyous miracle of my pregnancy by turning it into a dirty, cheap political scandal. They wanted to preemptively destroy my credibility so nobody would ever believe the actual medical truth hidden in my clinic safe. Elias walked into the reception area carrying a box of new medical supplies. He immediately noticed my pale face and the trembling phone in my hand. He set the box down and crossed the room in 3 long strides. "What did they do now, Sienna?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I handed him the phone and watched his jaw clench tightly as he read the vile messages. His gray eyes darkened into a lethal, stormy slate. "They are trying to destroy my reputation before I can even announce my pregnancy," I whispered, fighting back tears of sheer frustration. "Chloe is telling the whole city I am a loose woman trying to extort Marcus." Elias did not yell or lose his temper. He simply handed the phone back to me and pulled me into a fierce protective embrace. "Let them talk, Sienna," he rumbled softly against my hair. "Let them dig their graves as deep as they possibly can. The higher they build this massive mountain of lies, the harder they are going to fall when we finally tear it down. You focus on our babies and keeping your stress low. I will handle the political predators trying to ruin our peace. We are not hiding from them anymore. We are going to let them walk right into their own trap." Elias held me for a long moment, letting his steady heartbeat ground my racing thoughts. The heavy silence in the clinic reception area was suddenly shattered by the sharp ringing of my cell phone resting on the front desk. I pulled away from his embrace and looked down at the glowing screen Marcus was calling. The timing was almost too predictable. He had undoubtedly seen the malicious rumors his sister-in-law and mother were aggressively spreading across the city. His political team was probably in a state of absolute panic over the optics of his ex-wife parading around pregnant, just weeks before his massive mayoral campaign announcement. I looked up at Elias, meeting his intense gray eyes. "I need to take this," I said firmly. "If I ignore him, he will only escalate his tactics." Elias gave a short, decisive nod and stepped back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He did not interfere, but his physical presence in the room provided an unbreakable shield of comfort. I picked up the phone, swiped the screen, and pressed the device to my ear. I did not even get the chance to offer a simple greeting before Marcus launched into a vicious, unhinged tirade. "Are you completely out of your mind, Sienna?" he screamed through the speaker, his voice echoing with raw, unfiltered rage. "Did you honestly think you could pull off a pathetic, desperate stunt like this without me finding out? You are a disgusting embarrassment to this entire family and a massive liability to my political future." I took a slow, deep breath, keeping my voice perfectly level and deliberately calm. "We are no longer family, Marcus," I reminded him coldly, "and my private medical status has absolutely nothing to do with your political campaign. You made sure of that when you publicly abandoned me at a country club dinner." He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that grated against my ears. You think you are so clever parading your swollen belly around the hospital parking lot? He snarled. Chloe saw you with that dirty blue-collar mechanic. We know exactly what you are doing, Sienna. You realized you lost your luxurious lifestyle, and now you are trying to manufacture a fake paternity scandal to extort my campaign fund. You probably paid some random stranger to get you pregnant just to enact this pathetic revenge plot against me. I stared out the front window of my clinic, watching the autumn leaves blow across the cracked sidewalk. The staggering weight of his narcissistic delusion was almost hard to comprehend. He genuinely believed the entire universe revolved around his political ambitions. He was so completely blinded by his own towering ego that he could not even fathom the simple, beautiful truth that I had simply moved on and found genuine happiness. I do not want a single dime of your dirty campaign money, Marcus, I stated firmly, gripping the phone tighter. And I certainly do not want you anywhere near my children. You need to call off your mother and Chloe right now. Their vicious smear campaign is crossing dangerous legal lines. Marcus lowered his voice into a deadly, menacing whisper that used to absolutely terrify me during our marriage. You do not get to make demands anymore, little girl. He threatened, his tone dripping with sheer arrogance. You are playing a very dangerous game with a man who holds the keys to this entire city. If you do not pack up your miserable life and leave Atlanta by the end of this week, I will personally destroy everything you have left. I will make sure you never counsel another patient for the rest of your miserable life. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, but I refused to let him hear my fear. You cannot touch my clinic, I fired back defensively. I built this practice entirely on my own merits. You have absolutely zero concept of how true power works in this town, he mocked cruelly. I play golf every single Sunday with the state medical board directors. I have already drafted a formal complaint against your practice. I will have your health counseling license permanently revoked for gross moral turpitude and deeply unethical public conduct. You are currently the subject of a massive community scandal, Sienna. No respectable medical board will ever allow a disgraced loose woman to counsel vulnerable patients. They will strip your credentials before you can even hire a cheap public defender. The sheer, calculated cruelty of his threat was staggering. He was actively trying to destroy my only source of income and my professional reputation just to protect his fake political image. He wanted to leave me destitute and completely disgraced. You have exactly 48 hours to issue a formal public statement, Marcus commanded, ruthlessly dictating his final terms. You will publicly apologize to my family for causing this unseemly media distraction. You will state on the official record that I am absolutely not the father of your illegitimate children and that you are seeking immediate psychiatric help. If you release that statement and quietly disappear from Georgia, I will kindly tell the medical board to drop their impending investigation. If you refuse, I will crush you so completely, you will not even be able to afford groceries for your bastard children. He paused, waiting for me to break down and beg for mercy, exactly like I used to do during our marriage. Instead, I looked at Elias. I thought about the heavy manila envelope safely locked inside my clinic safe, containing the absolute undeniable proof of his complete medical sterility, and his mother, corrupt financial bribes. I did not need to cry anymore. You are a weak, pathetic coward, Marcus, I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. I am not issuing any public apologies, and I am never leaving Atlanta. Do your absolute worst, because I promise you are completely unprepared for mine. I hung up. The phone and dropped it onto my desk. My hand was shaking slightly, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of finally fighting back. Elias stepped closer and placed a hand on my shoulder. He did not ask what Marcus had said, because he could read the fierce determination settling into my features. We spent the afternoon securing my clinic files and making sure the digital backups of the corrupt medical records were safely stored in multiple encrypted locations. I was not going to let them destroy my career or sanity. The next morning, a sleek courier car pulled up outside my clinic. A man in a tailored uniform stepped out and walked through my front door, carrying a thick, gold-embossed envelope. He handed it to me without a word and left immediately. I stared at the heavy cream-colored cardstock. The seal on the back bore the official crest of Vivian Megachurch. I broke the wax seal and pulled out an extravagant invitation. It was a VIP pass to the annual Atlanta Hope and Heritage Charity Gala. This was the most exclusive and highly publicized social event of the year for the city elite. Marcus and Vivian had effectively transformed the charity dinner into his official mayoral campaign launch party. The theme, printed in bold, elegant letters, was Family First Building Atlanta Future. It was the handwritten note attached to the back of the pass that truly revealed their venomous intentions. The note was penned in Chloe distinct looping handwriting. It read, "We have reserved a special front row seat just for you, Sienna. We are announcing my new pregnancy to the press tonight to celebrate our family flawless genetics. It would be a shame if you missed seeing what a real successful family looks like. Do not disappoint us by hiding like a coward." I handed the heavy cardstock to Elias. He read the malicious note, and a dark, dangerous smile spread across his rugged face. "They are setting a public trap for you," he said, his voice a low rumble of certainty. "They have invited the top journalists and the most influential political commentators in the state. If you decline the invitation, they will leak stories claiming you fled the city in disgrace because your illegitimate pregnancy was exposed. If you show up, they plan to ambush you with a live microphone and humiliate you in front of the flashing cameras. They want to paint you as the bitter, unstable ex-wife seeking revenge." Elias was entirely correct. Marcus and his family were orchestrating a spectacular public execution of my character. They wanted to use my pregnant body as a prop to elevate their own fake moral superiority. By parading Chloe and her supposedly superior genetics in front of the wealthy donors, they would secure massive campaign funding. By crushing me simultaneously, Marcus would prove his ruthless strength to his political backers. It was a perfectly calculated sociopathic masterstroke. I walked over to the clinic window and looked out at the street. My initial instinct was to throw the invitation straight into the shredder and lock my doors. I had spent 7 years shrinking myself to fit into their oppressive golden cage. The thought of walking into a massive ballroom filled with hundreds of people who were actively judging my pregnant body terrified me. I could already hear the vicious whispers of the churchwomen and the sharp clicking of reporter cameras. But then I thought about the heavy manila envelope locked securely inside my floor safe. I thought about Nurse Martha crying in the basement archives. I thought about the thousands of women who had been medically gaslit and emotionally abused by arrogant men like Marcus. If I ran away now, I would just be proving them right. I would be handing Marcus the keys to the city and allowing him to build a corrupt political empire on a foundation of lies. I placed my hands gently over my slightly swollen stomach, feeling a profound surge of maternal protection for my unborn twins. I was not going to let these monsters dictate the narrative of my children. I turned back to face Elias. His gray eyes were watching me intently, waiting for my decision. "I am going to that gala," I announced, my voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "I am going to walk right into their pathetic little trap, and I am going to tear their entire political dynasty straight down to the foundation." Elias let out a deep, booming laugh that instantly shattered the tension in the room. "I was hoping you would say that, Sienna," he replied, stepping forward to wrap me in a warm, protective embrace. "We are going to need to do some serious shopping today. If you walk into the lion den, you are going to do it looking like absolute royalty. And you are not walking in there alone." I looked up at him, feeling a sudden wave of confusion. The invitation specifically mocked my single status. Marcus expected me to show up alone and vulnerable. "Are you coming with me?" I asked. Elias smiled, and the dangerous glint in his eye returned. "I am absolutely attending this little charity dinner," he promised smoothly. "I actually received my own private invitation. Weeks ago, Marcus and Vivian have been desperately trying to secure a meeting with me for months. They just have no idea who I actually am." The mystery surrounding Elias deepened, but I trusted him completely. We spent the rest of the day preparing for the gala. I called a trusted friend who owned a high-end boutique downtown to find the perfect maternity evening gown. I reviewed the medical documents one more time, ensuring every bank transfer receipt and sterile diagnosis report was legible and ready for projection. Marcus wanted a media spectacle to launch his campaign. I was going to give him the most unforgettable news story this city had ever seen. The morning of the charity gala arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension hanging in the air. The adrenaline that had fueled my fierce determination the previous afternoon had slowly evaporated overnight, leaving behind a cold, hollow pit of anxiety in my stomach. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring blankly at the steaming cup of coffee in my hands. The bright sunlight streaming through the cabin windows felt entirely too cheerful for the brutal battle awaiting me tonight. Doubt began to creep into my mind like a dark, insidious shadow. Vivian and Marcus had spent their entire lives mastering the art of public manipulation. They owned the judges, they owned the media, and they owned the wealthy congregation that worshipped at their feet. I was just a discarded ex-wife running a small independent clinic. If my plan failed, if they somehow managed to spin the medical records or cut the power to the projectors, I would be completely ruined. Marcus would ensure I ended up in a jail cell for defamation or forgery. I placed my hands protectively over my stomach, feeling the gentle fluttering movements of my twins. The primal fear of failing them, of allowing my children to be branded as illegitimate scandals by that toxic family, paralyzed me. I picked up my phone, ready to call the boutique and cancel my dress fitting. I was ready to surrender to the overwhelming fear and pack my bags to leave Atlanta forever. A heavy knock on the cabin door interrupted my spiraling panic. Elias walked in carrying 2 large garment bags over his broad shoulder. He took one look at my pale face and trembling hands and instantly knew exactly what was running through my terrified mind. He carefully hung the bags on the coat rack today. He walked over to this kitchen table. He pulled out a chair and sat directly across from me, resting his large, calloused hands over mine. "You are overthinking, Sienna," he said, his voice a steady, comforting rumble in the quiet kitchen. "You are letting the ghosts of your past marriage dictate your current reality. Marcus is a coward who hides behind his mother church hats and expensive lawyers. He only has power because people like you allow him to keep it." I looked down at my hands, fighting back fresh tears. What if they turn the crowd against me? Elias, I whispered, my voice cracking with vulnerability. What if they cut the microphones before I can even speak the truth? Elias leaned back in his chair and a cold, calculated smile slowly spread across his rugged face. It was a terrifying, beautifully dangerous expression that completely transformed him from a quiet handyman into an apex predator. He reached into his denim jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek silver flash drive, tossing it onto the table between us. "They will not cut the microphones, Sienna," he promised with absolute chilling certainty. I spent the early hours of this morning having a very private, very persuasive conversation with the chief audiovisual director of the Ritz-Carlton. He has been entirely secured and heavily compensated. The moment you step up to that podium, the control room will lock the system. No one will be able to touch the screens or the audio feeds until your presentation is completely finished. I stared at the silver flash drive, feeling a massive wave of relief wash over my exhausted body. "You bribed the hotel staff?" I asked, my eyes widening in shock. Elias let out a dark, low chuckle. "Let us just say I made a highly compelling contribution to his retirement fund," he corrected smoothly. "But that is not the only preparation I made for tonight." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the gold-embossed gala invitation Chloe had sent me. He traced the elegant lettering with his thumb, his gray eyes darkening with lethal intent. "Marcus thinks he is going to use this charity dinner to announce his mayoral run and solidify his corrupt political empire," Elias stated, his tone dripping with sheer disdain. "He thinks he holds all the keys to the city. But I have prepared a small special gift for the future mayor tonight." A gift that will guarantee his political career ends before the appetizers are even served. I looked at Elias, feeling that familiar sense of deep mystery surrounding him. What kind of gift? I asked intensely. Curious, Elias simply smiled and tapped the invitation against the wooden table. The kind of gift that a man like Marcus can never recover from. He answered vaguely but firmly. You just focus on delivering your medical truth to the press, Sienna. Leave the financial and political destruction entirely to me. I promise you, by the time the clock strikes midnight tonight, the name Marcus will be nothing more than a toxic punchline in this city. His absolute, unwavering confidence finally shattered the last remaining fragments of my fear. The terrified victim who had signed away her home in the pouring rain was officially dead. I stood up from the kitchen table, feeling a renewed, fierce energy coursing through my veins. I grabbed the silver flash drive and slipped it safely into my purse. Then let us get ready, I said, my voice ringing with steady authority. I have a spectacular mayoral campaign to ruin today. The rest of the afternoon passed in a highly focused blur of meticulous preparation. I drove downtown to my friend's exclusive boutique and slipped into the custom maternity evening gown. The deep emerald green silk draped perfectly over my curves, highlighting the beautiful swell of my twin pregnancy. My friend arranged my hair in elegant sweeping waves and applied flawless striking makeup that made me look like absolute royalty. I stared at myself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the powerful, radiant woman looking back at me. We were finally ready to fight this ultimate battle together tonight, completely fearless. Elias arranged for a sleek black town car to drive us to the Ritz-Carlton. The downtown streets were glittering with city lights reflecting off the damp pavement from an earlier rain shower. When we pulled up to the grand entrance, the sheer magnitude of Marcus and Vivian's political ambition was on full display. Spotlights illuminated the hotel facade, and a long red carpet stretched from the valet station all the way to the heavy brass doors. Dozens of local reporters and photographers were clustered behind velvet ropes, eager to capture the arrival of Atlanta's wealthy elite. I took a deep, steadying breath in the back seat, smoothing the emerald silk of my gown over my prominent belly. Elias sat beside me, looking striking and deeply formidable in his perfectly tailored dark tuxedo. He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. I will enter through the side doors and make sure our audiovisual friend in the control room is completely ready. Elias murmured, pressing a warm kiss to my knuckles. This is your moment to command the stage, Sienna. Make them all stop and stare. I nodded, feeling a powerful surge of adrenaline wash away any lingering doubt. The driver opened my door and I stepped out onto the red carpet alone. The cool evening air hit my bare shoulders as I walked forward with my head held high. The heavy emerald fabric flowed beautifully around my legs, with every step highlighting the unmistakable curve of my twin pregnancy. Instantly, the flashing strobe lights of camera flashes erupted around me. Reporters who had been expecting just another wealthy socialite suddenly recognized my face from the vicious rumors Chloe had maliciously spread throughout the city. The disgraced barren ex-wife of the future mayoral candidate was not hiding in a dark basement. She was walking the red carpet, looking utterly radiant and unapologetically pregnant. I kept my expression perfectly serene, offering a polite closed-lip smile to the flashing lenses. I walked through the grand brass doors and stepped into the massive crystal-lit ballroom. The charity gala was a breathtaking display of excessive wealth. Towering floral arrangements of white roses adorned dozens of circular tables draped in gold linen. A string quartet played elegant classical music in the corner while waiters circulated with expensive champagne. The room was packed with hundreds of powerful politicians, church elders, and corporate executives. As I walked down the grand staircase into the main ballroom, the music seemed to fade into the background. A physical ripple of absolute shock spread rapidly through the elite crowd. Conversations abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Crystal glasses were lowered carefully to tables. Heads turned rapidly in my direction as the wealthy churchwomen who had eagerly consumed Chloe's toxic gossip stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. I could hear their aggressive, hushed whispers cutting through the quiet room like sharp little knives. Is that Sienna walking in here looking like that? Oh my goodness, she actually has the sheer audacity to show her face tonight. Look at the massive size of her stomach. She is absolutely huge. Who on earth is the father of that illegitimate baby? I ignored their judgmental stares and walked gracefully toward the center of the room. I felt the powerful protective presence of my unborn twins, giving me the strength to stand tall against their collective hostility. I spotted Marcus, standing near the main stage, flanked by his wealthy campaign donors. His face instantly drained of all color when his eyes locked onto my pregnant silhouette. Vivian stood right beside him wearing a stiff silver gown, her jaw dropping open in sheer, unadulterated horror. They had expected a broken, weeping victim to sneak into the back row to beg for scraps of mercy. They had completely underestimated the fierce warrior walking toward them. Suddenly, Chloe emerged from the crowd, parting the sea of wealthy guests with aggressive determination. She wore a tight white maternity dress, designed to show off her own pregnancy as a symbol of pure genetic superiority. She motioned frantically to the event staff standing near the soundboard. A harsh screech of microphone feedback suddenly pierced the quiet ballroom, making several guests flinch and cover their ears. Chloe smiled a wicked, triumphant smile and lifted a wireless microphone to her lips. She wanted to ensure every single journalist and politician in the room heard her vicious public execution. Well, 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 ladies and gentlemen, Chloe announced, her voice booming loudly across the massive speaker system. It seems we have a very unexpected and highly controversial guest joining our charity gala tonight. Let us all give a very warm Atlanta welcome to my former sister-in-law, Sienna. The spotlight operator, who was clearly instructed beforehand, suddenly swung a bright, blinding white light directly onto me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, allowing the intense beam to illuminate my emerald gown and my proud stance. Chloe walked slowly toward me, her high heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. She stopped a few feet away, looking me up and down with an expression of pure, mocking pity. She tilted her head, feigning deep religious concern for the benefit of the eager press photographers, stepping closer to capture the drama. Sienna, it is incredibly brave of you to show your face in high society after your shameful fall from grace. Chloe crooned into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We all know how you struggled with your unfortunate barren condition during your marriage to Marcus. It must be terribly difficult for you to watch him launch his political career without you by his side. She paused dramatically, waiting for the crowd to murmur in agreement before delivering her calculated, venomous strike. But we are all absolutely shocked to see you walking in here carrying a child out of wedlock. Did you honestly think you could just show up pregnant today and extort my powerful brother-in-law? Chloe let the question hang in the heavy air of the ballroom, allowing the sheer audacity of her accusation to sink into the minds of the wealthy audience. She paced slowly around me like a predator, circling its trapped prey, her high heels echoing sharply against the marble floor. The camera flashes intensified, capturing every single angle of my supposed public humiliation. I could see the journalists frantically typing on their smartphones, eager to be the first to break the scandalous story of the disgraced ex-wife ruining a pristine political campaign. Marcus stood comfortably near the main stage, adopting an expression of fake solemn pity. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and shook his head slightly, performing the role of the innocent, aggrieved statesman perfectly. Vivian stood right beside him, crossing her arms over her silver gown, her face radiating pure malicious triumph. They honestly believed they had completely broken me. They genuinely thought I would collapse onto the floor in a puddle of humiliated tears and beg for their mercy in front of the entire city. Chloe stopped pacing and positioned herself perfectly between me and the largest cluster of media cameras. She placed one hand on her hip and let out a dramatic, heavy sigh into the wireless microphone. It is truly tragic to see what becomes of women who cannot fulfill their natural duties in a marriage, she announced, her voice dripping with venomous fake sympathy. We all know how deeply Marcus suffered during those 7 long years of your barren emptiness. Sienna, he gave you absolutely everything a woman could ever ask for, and you repaid his endless generosity by becoming a bitter, unhinged stalker. She turned her attention toward the main stage, addressing her brother-in-law. Directly, Marcus, since tonight is all about charity and giving back to the less fortunate community, I have a wonderful proposal. Why do we not start the evening by demonstrating your incredible political benevolence? Perhaps the campaign could make a very generous donation to the Fatherless Single Mothers Fund on behalf of your tragic ex-wife. After all, it is painfully clear she is going to need all the financial assistance she can get to raise those fatherless bastards she is carrying. A collective wave of cruel, mocking laughter instantly rippled through the massive, crystal-lit ballroom. The wealthy politicians and elite socialites chuckled into their champagne flutes, deeply entertained by my public execution. Vivian smiled brightly and clapped her hands together, applauding her daughter-in-law. Vicious performance. Marcus nodded graciously toward the crowd, playing the part of the magnanimous, forgiving leader. The absolute sheer cruelty of their coordinated attack was staggering. They were actively using my unborn children as the punchline to a disgusting political joke. The reporters aggressively pushed against the velvet ropes, thrusting their recording devices forward, anticipating my total emotional breakdown. They were waiting for my lower lip to tremble. They were waiting for me to cover my face and run sobbing toward the exit doors, exactly like a defeated coward. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not lower my gaze or shrink away from the blinding white spotlight. Instead, I felt a fierce, burning fire ignite deep inside my chest. It was a powerful, radiant heat that completely consumed any remaining traces of the frightened, submissive woman I used to be. I placed my hands firmly over the emerald silk covering my stomach, feeling a sudden, strong kick from one of my twins. They were perfectly safe, and I was absolutely fearless. I looked directly into Chloe, smug, arrogant eyes. She expected me to retreat, but I took a sudden, decisive step forward, closing the small distance between us. In a fraction of a second, Chloe blinked in surprise, her triumphant smile faltering slightly as my sudden movement caught her completely off guard. She opened her mouth to deliver another scripted insult, but she never got the chance to speak. I reached out with lightning speed and aggressively snatched the wireless microphone right out of her manicured hand. My grip was incredibly firm and unyielding. Chloe gasped loudly in genuine shock, stumbling backward in her expensive designer heels. "Hey!" she shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its fake sweet tone. "Give that back to me right now." I ignored her pathetic demand entirely. I turned my back on her, dismissing her existence completely, and faced the massive sea of wealthy guests. The cruel laughter in the ballroom died instantly, replaced by a tense, breathless silence. The sudden shift in my demeanor sent a physical shockwave through the room. I stood tall and regal in the blinding spotlight, gripping the cold metal of the microphone. I locked my eyes directly onto Marcus, who was suddenly standing very rigidly near the stage. The smug, political smile had completely vanished from his handsome face, replaced by a sudden flash of genuine panic. Vivian gripped his arm tightly, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket. They suddenly realized they had made a massive, catastrophic miscalculation. I raised the microphone to my lips, taking a slow, measured breath. The entire ballroom waited in absolute pin-drop silence, anticipating my response to their brutal public shaming. I did not yell, and I did not let a single ounce of anger bleed into my words. My voice echoed through the massive high-end speaker system with a calm, terrifyingly lethal authority that commanded absolute respect from every single person in the room. "Thank you for the generous offer, Chloe," I stated smoothly, projecting my voice with perfect, unwavering clarity. "But you can keep your pity money for your own impending legal fees. I am not a helpless charity case, and I am certainly not a bitter stalker. I am a woman who finally woke up from a devastating nightmare designed by the people standing right there." I took another deliberate step forward, directly targeting Marcus with my lethal, unwavering, intense stare. The silence in the room was absolute. Hundreds of wealthy guests held their collective breath, waiting for my next words. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus, refusing to let him look away from the woman he tried to destroy. "You want to talk about the father of my children?" I asked, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers above us. "You want to spin a scandalous story for your wealthy donors and pretend you are the victim of a bitter ex-wife? Let me clear up that little mystery right now for everyone in this room. The father of my twins is very much present. He is a man of genuine integrity and profound strength. He is standing right outside these doors, and he has given me more love and respect in 6 months than you managed to fake in 7 years of marriage. So you can stop pretending to pity my unborn babies. They are perfectly safe and fiercely protected." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously above his expensive silk tie. His political smile was completely gone, replaced by a mask of sheer terror. Vivian took a step forward, opening her mouth to shout something, but I raised my hand and cut her off immediately. "I am not here to talk about my new life," I continued, projecting my voice effortlessly across the massive ballroom. "I am here because I realized I took something with me when you kicked me out of my home in the pouring rain. I took the blame for your ultimate failure. I carried the heavy, toxic weight of your deepest shame for 7 long, agonizing years. You let me inject my body with dangerous hormones. You let your arrogant mother pray for my barren womb in front of her entire congregation. You let your arrogant sister-in-law mock my empty arms at every single family gathering. You built your entire political platform on the pristine image of a flawless masculine leader who was tragically burdened by a broken, defective wife." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the brutal truth hang heavily in the air. The politicians and socialites were staring at Marcus with growing suspicion. The carefully constructed narrative was beginning to fracture before their eyes. "But I am not broken," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. "I never was. I am a perfectly healthy woman carrying 2 beautiful children, and I am here tonight to return the shame that never belonged to me in the first place." I turned my attention away from Marcus and looked up toward the darkened control booth at the back of the ballroom. I gave a single sharp nod to the audiovisual director Elias had secured earlier that morning. Right on cue, the elegant classical music completely cut off. The massive high-definition projection screens flanking the main stage suddenly flickered to life. The bright, glaring light illuminated the terrified faces of the campaign donors. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd as the first document appeared on the massive screens in stark, undeniable high resolution. It was the original, unedited laboratory report from the prominent fertility clinic we had attended for years. The clinical text was magnified massively, making it impossible for anyone in the room to miss the devastating conclusion. The medical report clearly displayed Marcus and his full legal name at the top of the page. Below his name, the diagnostic results were highlighted in bright, aggressive yellow marker. Diagnosis of absolute non-obstructive azoospermia. 0 viable sperm count. Total and complete male sterility. The medical truth was bare and exposed for the entire city to witness. Marcus was not the virile genetic powerhouse he claimed to be. He was a completely sterile man who had built his political empire on a foundation of profound medical deception. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers and aggressive camera flashes. Reporters frantically raised their lenses, capturing the damning medical evidence displayed on the towering screens. Marcus staggered backward as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. He looked up at the projection screens and his face drained of all remaining color. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had completely snapped shut around him. But I was not finished dismantling their corrupt dynasty yet. I waited exactly 10 seconds before nodding to the control booth a second time. The screens instantly shifted to display the next piece of devastating evidence. These were the bank transfer receipts Nurse Martha had given me. The documents clearly showed massive untraceable cash wires moving directly from the personal bank accounts of Vivian to the chief medical officer of the fertility clinic. The dates on the financial transfers matched perfectly with the dates of my agonizing, unnecessary medical procedures. I raised the microphone again, ensuring my voice cut through the rising chaos in the room. "You did not just lie about your genetics, Marcus," I stated coldly, letting the absolute truth wash over his horrified campaign donors. "Your mother actively bribed medical professionals to falsify my health records. She paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars to subject me to physical torture just to protect your fragile, arrogant ego. You built this entire mayoral campaign on family values while running a corrupt, fraudulent conspiracy behind closed doors. You are not a leader, Marcus. You are a coward and a complete fraud." Vivian let out a piercing, dramatic shriek that echoed painfully across the ballroom. She lunged forward, pointing a shaking manicured finger at the projection screens. "Turn those screens off right now," she screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly out of place. "This is a malicious digital forgery. This woman is a dangerous lunatic trying to ruin my son. Security, get in here and arrest this crazy woman immediately. Turn off the main power to those screens before I have you all fired." The massive high-definition screens cast a harsh, unforgiving glare over the opulent ballroom. Every eye was riveted to the undeniable proof displayed before them. The clinical black and white text of Marcus's medical records was magnified to impossible proportions, impossible to ignore or wave away. The bright yellow highlighting I had meticulously applied emphasized the devastating conclusion: absolute non-obstructive azoospermia, total and complete sterility. The gasps that followed were not coordinated or polite. They were raw, visceral reactions to a profound deception unmasked. Marcus stumbled backward, his face a ghastly shade of gray. The pristine political armor he wore had been shattered instantly. He looked from the screens to the faces of his most crucial donors and saw exactly what he feared most. Not pity, but deep, unforgiving judgment. He had sold them a narrative of perfection, of superior genetics, and a flawless family legacy. Now they were looking at a man who was not only biologically incapable of fulfilling that promise, but who had built his entire public identity on a massive, deliberate lie. Beside him, Vivian's reaction was a study in aristocratic panic. She clutched her silver gown, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The elegant facade she had maintained for decades, the untouchable matriarch of the megachurch, was cracking under the weight of her own corruption. The projection screens didn't stop at the medical records. With a simple, chilling clarity, the slideshow transitioned to the next piece of evidence: the bank transfer receipts. The names were clear, the amounts staggering, and the dates aligned perfectly with my years of unnecessary, agonizing fertility treatments. I held the microphone loosely, now the power of my words already delivered. I watched the elite crowd process the information. These were people who understood the mechanics of power and money. They saw the receipts and recognized immediately what they meant: a calculated, systematic bribery designed to protect a fragile ego at the cost of a woman's physical and mental health. The murmur of the crowd grew, transforming from shocked whispers into a low, angry hum. The very people Marcus had relied on to fund his political ambitions were now calculating the cost of associating with a fraud. Chloe, usually so quick with a venomous comeback, was entirely silent. She stared at the screens, her hands resting uselessly on her pregnant belly. The narrative of her own superiority, built on the premise that her husband's family possessed better genetics than mine, was dissolving. The realization that her brother-in-law was entirely sterile meant that the entire foundation of their family's bragging rights was a hollow sham. Marcus's initial shock finally morphed into desperate, erratic action. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his face contorted with a mixture of terror and rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice cracking as he finally found the words he desperately needed to stop the hemorrhage of his reputation. "Turn those screens off," he screamed, his voice raw and ugly, completely lacking the polished cadence of a mayoral candidate. "This is a forgery. It's a malicious digital forgery created by a bitter, unstable woman. Security, security, get her out of here. The command echoed through the ballroom, sharp and desperate. He turned to the side of the stage, frantically waving at the uniformed security guards stationed near the exits. Get her out! Confiscate her phone! She's trying to ruin this charity event with her lies! The sheer panic in his voice only served to further damage his credibility. A man secure in his truth does not scream for the forceful removal of his accuser. He addresses the accusation. Vivian, recovering a fraction of her composure, immediately joined the frantic effort to silence me. She's insane! Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. She's suffered a complete mental breakdown since the divorce. You all know how difficult she was. This is just a pathetic attempt to extort money from our family. Don't listen to a word she says. She turned to the nearest cluster of wealthy donors, her hands clasped in a pleading gesture. Please, you must understand, this is a tragedy of a broken mind. But the donors were not looking at Vivian with sympathy. They were looking at the screens where the bank transfer receipts were undeniable stark evidence of a financial crime. They were looking at the medical records which carried the official seal of the prominent clinic Vivian had used. The contrast between my calm, steady demeanor and the frantic, screaming panic of Marcus and Vivian was not lost on anyone. I had not yelled, I had not broken down, I had simply presented the truth. The security guards, caught between the screaming commands of the event host and the chilling, undeniable evidence displayed on the screens, hesitated. They looked toward Marcus, then toward me, uncertain of how to proceed. Marcus's face flushed an ugly dark red. What are you waiting for? He bellowed, his composure entirely gone. I am Marcus Thorne. This is my event. Throw this woman out of my gala immediately. The sheer arrogance of his demand, the assumption that his name alone was enough to dictate reality, hung in the air. Two large security guards finally moved, stepping purposefully through the crowd, toward where I stood in the center of the room. The crowd parted reluctantly, some guests whispering urgently to each other, others pulling out their phones to record the unfolding chaos. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, my hands resting lightly over the swell of my pregnancy, knowing that the real power in this room was no longer held by the man screaming on the stage. As the guards closed the distance, their expressions grim and focused, the heavy brass doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly burst open. The loud, resonant crack of the heavy wood hitting the walls echoed through the vast space, instantly drawing every eye away from the screens, away from Marcus and away from me. The chaotic noise of the room abruptly silenced, replaced by a sudden electric tension. The true architect of this evening's destruction had arrived, and the game was about to change irrevocably. The two security guards had closed the distance, their large hands reaching out to grab my arms and forcibly remove me from the center of the ballroom. Marcus's face twisted into a grotesque mask of triumphant relief. He truly believed that by silencing me and removing the visual evidence, he could somehow stuff the truth back into the dark corner where it had hidden for 7 years. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I held my ground, knowing that my part of the plan was perfectly executed and that the real devastation was about to begin. Before the guards could make contact, a sound completely shattered the tense atmosphere. It wasn't a shout or a scream, but the heavy synchronized thud of polished leather shoes striking marble, echoing with military precision. The massive brass doors at the back of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom didn't just open. They were violently thrown wide, slamming against the walls with a resounding crash that made several guests jump. The noise instantly severed the mounting panic in the room, drawing every single eye away from the projection screens and away from the confrontation unfolding in the center. Even Marcus's security guards hesitated, turning their heads to look toward the entrance. What they saw was a scene straight out of a high-stakes political thriller, not a charity gala. A phalanx of men in immaculately tailored dark suits marched into the room. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency that screamed elite private security. These weren't the standard hotel guards Marcus had hired. These were professionals who operated at a completely different echelon of power. They moved forward in a V formation, instantly cutting a wide, unmistakable path through the sea of stunned politicians and wealthy donors. The crowd, sensing the raw authority radiating from the men, instinctively parted, pressing themselves against the decorated tables to clear the way. Following closely behind this vanguard was a group of individuals who caused a different kind of shockwave to ripple through the room. They weren't politicians, and they certainly weren't security. They were dressed in sharp conservative business attire, but their faces were instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the highest echelons of American medicine. The whispers started immediately spreading like wildfire among the elite guests. Is that Dr. Harrison? A prominent socialite gasped, pointing toward the group. The head of reproductive endocrinology at Johns Hopkins. And that's Dr. Patel, the chief surgeon from the Mayo Clinic. Another voice murmured, thick with disbelief. What are they doing here? This was no ordinary medical staff. This was a highly exclusive celebrity-tier medical team, the kind of specialists who commanded months-long waiting lists and astronomical consulting fees. They were the doctors who treated heads of state, global CEOs, and royalty. And they were walking into Marcus's campaign launch with expressions of grim, unified determination. Their presence alone validated everything I had just presented. It silently screamed that the medical records on the screens were not only authentic, but significant enough to draw the attention of the nation's top medical minds. Marcus stared at the approaching group, his jaw working uselessly. The panic that had briefly subsided when his guards moved in now returned tenfold, completely paralyzing him. He recognized the doctors. Anyone with aspirations of serious political power knew who the real power players were, and this team represented a level of influence he could only dream of possessing. Vivian, standing beside him, looked as if she might physically collapse. The matriarch, who prided herself on controlling the narrative, was now completely powerless against this display of undeniable, overwhelming authority. The elite security detail reached the center of the room, smoothly intercepting the two hotel guards who had been about to grab me. There was no violence, no shouting. The private security simply stepped between us, their physical presence an immovable wall that clearly communicated a single undeniable message: do not touch her. The hotel guards, recognizing they were entirely outmatched, backed away slowly, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The celebrity medical team stopped just behind the security line, forming a protective semicircle around me. Dr. Harrison, a tall woman with an aura of absolute competence, stepped forward slightly, her gaze sweeping over Marcus and Vivian with clinical detachment. Her very presence was a devastating blow to the desperate lie Marcus had tried to spin just moments before. He had accused me of forging documents. Now the nation's leading medical experts were standing in his ballroom, effectively acting as my witnesses. The silence in the room had shifted from shocked anticipation to a heavy, suffocating dread. The guests, the journalists, the politicians, they all understood that this was no longer just a messy divorce spilling into the public eye. This was a carefully orchestrated, high-level dismantling of a political candidate. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely obliterated. Marcus, who had spent the entire evening acting as the king holding court, was now nothing more than a cornered rat desperately looking for an exit that no longer existed. Chloe, still clutching the microphone she hadn't dared to use since I snatched the spotlight, looked at the medical team, her face a mask of dawning comprehension. The arrogant sneer that had defined her entire existence had completely melted away, replaced by the stark realization that the family she had married into the family she had weaponized against me was about to be ground into dust. But the most devastating moment was yet to come. The security detail and the medical team had cleared the path and established the perimeter, but they were not the main event. They were simply the heralds, the prelude to the true architect of this destruction. The crowd, still holding its breath, watched as the final figure stepped through the grand brass doors. The air in the ballroom seemed to grow instantly colder, the tension skyrocketing to an almost unbearable level. The man who had orchestrated this entire sequence, The man who had promised me a gift that would end Marcus's career before it began finally made his entrance, and he was not the man any of them expected to see. The atmosphere in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom had already been stretched to its absolute breaking point, but the arrival of the final figure caused the very air to turn to ice. He didn't rush. He didn't make sudden, aggressive movements. He walked with the slow, deliberate, and terrifying grace of a predator, entering an enclosure where he already knew he owned every single piece of prey. Elias Thorne stepped through the grand brass doors, completely obliterating the rugged, unassuming persona I had come to know. Gone was the faded flannel shirt, the worn-out denim, and the scuffed work boots of the quiet suburban handyman. The man who walked into the center of Atlanta's elite was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders with lethal precision. His silver hair, usually windblown, was impeccably styled, but it was his eyes, those piercing, cold, calculating gray eyes, that truly commanded the room. He radiated an aura of absolute unyielding power, the kind of wealth and influence that didn't need to shout to be heard. The silence in the ballroom deepened, transforming from shock into a palpable, breathless terror among those who recognized him. And judging by the rapidly paling faces of the city's most influential figures, many of them did. I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the man I loved reveal his true nature. The celebrity medical team and the elite security detail had cleared his path, and he walked straight toward me, his gaze never wavering. He stopped by my side, and with a gesture of profound protective intimacy, he placed his large, warm hand on the small of my back. He didn't say a word, but the physical claim he made sent a clear, undeniable message to every person in the room. She is mine, and you will answer to me. Marcus's reaction was the study in profound, escalating panic. The false bravado he had attempted to summon just moments ago evaporated completely. He stared at Elias, his mouth opening and closing, as if he were physically choking on the sudden, terrifying realization dawning upon him. He looked from Elias to me and back to Elias, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Beside him, Vivian's knees buckled slightly, and she had to grip the edge of a decorated table to remain standing. The matriarch, who had spent her life cultivating power within the narrow confines of her church, suddenly found herself standing in the presence of a man who owned the very ground they stood on. But it was Marcus's campaign manager, a slick, usually unflappable political operative named David, who finally verbalized the catastrophe. David pushed through the frozen crowd, his face sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. He reached Marcus's side, trembling violently, and leaned in to whisper frantically into his candidate's ear. In the dead silence of the room, his desperate, hyperventilating whisper carried clearly to the front rows. "Marcus!" David choked out, his eyes darting frantically toward Elias. "Marcus, you have to stop! Do you know who that is?" Marcus, still paralyzed, managed a slow, jerky shake of his head. "That's Elias Thorne," David hissed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "He's the chairman of the board of Thorne Medical Group. He's the majority shareholder. He's the billionaire who quietly funneled 70% of your campaign funding through those super PACs." David grabbed Marcus's arm, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric of the suit. "And Marcus? He's the actual legal owner of the entire commercial district you just promised the developers. He owns the land." The revelation dropped like a bomb in the silent ballroom. The collective gasp that followed was not one of scandalized gossip, but of genuine, profound shock. The wealthy donors, the politicians, the journalists, everyone instantly calculated the magnitude of the destruction unfolding before them. Marcus's entire political empire, his campaign funding, his flagship commercial development project, the very foundation of his mayoral run, was entirely controlled by the man currently standing with his arm wrapped protectively around the ex-wife Marcus had just tried to publicly destroy. The irony was so immense, so brutally poetic, that it seemed almost theatrical. Marcus swayed on his feet, the blood draining completely from his face, leaving him a sickly gray pallor. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution order being signed. He had spent months trying to starve me out financially, trying to force me to sell my small suburban cabin, completely oblivious to the fact that the man helping me fix the plumbing was the actual billionaire kingpin holding the keys to his entire political future. Chloe, who had been completely silent since her microphone ambush failed, stared at Elias with an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. The arrogant smirk that had defined her existence was gone, replaced by the stark realization that she had just picked a fight with a titan. She had mocked him, called him a dirty, low-class mechanic, and threatened to have him arrested. The magnitude of her catastrophic error was clearly crashing down upon her. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Marcus, his gray eyes devoid of any warmth or mercy. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating as Elias allowed the reality of the situation to fully sink into the minds of the corrupt family standing before him. "You seem surprised, Marcus," Elias finally said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that carried effortlessly across the silent room. "Did you honestly believe you could build a political empire on a foundation of lies and expect the ground not to swallow you whole?" Marcus tried to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse or desperate plea, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. He was entirely, completely broken. "I warned you," Elias continued, his tone dangerously calm. "I told you to leave this woman alone. I told you I would break you if you ever tried to touch her again. You chose to ignore that warning. You chose to orchestrate this pathetic public spectacle." Elias tightened his grip on my waist slightly, his physical presence an immovable anchor. "And now you are going to face the absolute uncompromising consequences of your arrogance." Vivian finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a ragged, desperate screech. "You can't do this," she cried, abandoning all pretense of elegance. "We are a respected family. We have power in this city. You can't just come in here and ruin my son." Elias slowly turned his head to look at the screaming matriarch. His expression did not change. It remained a mask of cold, calculated execution. "Vivian," Elias said softly, the quiet intensity of his voice far more terrifying than a shout. "Your power is an illusion built on bribery and manipulation, and as of tonight, that illusion is completely, permanently over." He looked back at Marcus, delivering the final devastating blow. "Your campaign is finished. Your development project is dead. Your law firm is next." Elias pulled me closer against his side, grounding me in his warm, solid presence. I felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, a stark contrast to the chaotic gasping of the men and women standing before us. Marcus shook his head frantically, trying to deny the inevitable destruction of his entire world. "You cannot bankrupt my law firm," Marcus stammered. "We have lucrative contracts." "You had contracts," Elias corrected Thorne. "Medical Group acquired the parent company of your largest client last week. I personally ordered the immediate termination of your retainer due to ethical breaches. Furthermore, the commercial loan your firm took out was financed through a bank where I sit on the executive board. Since the suburban development project is dead, you are in default. The bank is calling in the loan tomorrow morning at 9. Your firm is mathematically and legally bankrupt. Marcus, you have absolutely nothing left." The precision of Elias dismantling Marcus' financial life was breathtaking. He systematically eradicated every single pillar of Marcus' wealth. The campaign donors lingering nearby began quietly stepping backward, distancing themselves from a sinking ship. No one wanted to be caught in the blast radius. Chloe watched this total financial annihilation with wide, panicked eyes. Her husband standing nearby looked equally horrified. Chloe realized the immense wealth she had married into was evaporating. She stepped forward, thrusting her pregnant belly out in a pathetic attempt to use her unborn child as a shield. "You are a monster!" Chloe shrieked, pointing at Elias. "You cannot do this to our family. We are expecting a child. My husband and I are carrying the true legacy of this family." She turned frantically to the remaining journalists, trying to salvage public sympathy. "Look at what they are doing to a pregnant woman. My baby carries the prestigious bloodline of this family, and we deserve respect." Elias let out a low, dark chuckle that silenced her hysterical rant. He looked down at Chloe. You should be more careful about where you boast about your superior genetics, Elias said with lethal irony. You should also be careful about where you receive prenatal care. He gave a brief nod to the tall woman standing at the edge of our protective circle. Dr. Harrison, the brilliant head of reproductive endocrinology, stepped forward. She smoothed her tailored blazer and adjusted her glasses, looking at Chloe with absolute clinical detachment. The ballroom held its breath. "Good evening, Chloe," Dr. Harrison stated. "You might recognize me from the Thorne VIP maternity clinic. You visited our facility last week for a comprehensive non-invasive prenatal screening. It is a very exclusive test that analyzes fetal DNA in the mother blood to screen for genetic abnormalities." Chloe took a staggering step backward, her hands dropping protectively over her stomach. "You have no right to discuss my private medical records," she stammered, her voice trembling with terror. "That is strictly illegal." "It would be illegal if I were disclosing your health status," Dr. Harrison corrected sharply. "However, I am the Chief Medical Director of the Thorne Medical Group Network. When a patient attempts to defraud our billing department, the hospital administration is legally required to investigate. During our routine quality assurance review of your VIP test results, we found a significant genetic anomaly." The silence in the ballroom was profound. Chloe, husband Marcus' own older brother, stepped up beside his wife, looking deeply confused and alarmed. "What anomaly?" he demanded, his voice rough. "What is wrong with my baby?" Dr. Harrison looked directly at the brother, her expression devoid of sympathy. "There is nothing medically wrong with the child," she clarified smoothly. "The anomaly is completely and purely genetic. The DNA profile of the fetus was automatically cross-referenced with our hospital extensive database for standard hereditary screening." Dr. Harrison paused, letting the tension stretch to its absolute limit. "The prenatal DNA test confirms with 100% medical certainty that the baby Chloe is carrying shares absolutely zero genetic material with you. You are not the father. In fact, the DNA profile is a perfect match for a local personal trainer who frequented the same luxury gym Chloe attends every Tuesday morning." The revelation struck the room with the force of a devastating earthquake. The collective gasp from the elite crowd was deafening. The pristine, arrogant facade of the perfect family had been completely obliterated by cold, hard medical science. Chloe had spent months viciously mocking my empty womb and praising her own ability to provide a superior heir. Now the entire city knew she was carrying a child, conceived during a cheap, sordid affair. Chloe let out a pathetic, strangled sob, shaking her head frantically. "No," she wept, reaching out toward her husband. "No, it is a lie. They are making it up to ruin us. Please, you have to believe me." But her husband was not looking at her with love or forgiveness. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. The public humiliation of learning his wife had been sleeping with a personal trainer snapped his sanity completely. He let out a raw, guttural roar of absolute rage. Before anyone could intervene, he lunged violently forward. He tackled Chloe, grabbing her by the shoulders and shoving her aggressively backward. She screamed in terror as she crashed hard into a towering floral arrangement, sending white roses and shattered crystal vases crashing onto the polished marble floor. The ballroom instantly erupted into sheer chaotic panic. Wealthy donors shrieked and scrambled out of the way to avoid flying glass. Marcus tried to pull his brother off the screaming woman, but the disgraced politician was immediately shoved aside by the furious husband. Vivian collapsed onto the floor, weeping hysterically as she watched her perfect, flawless family physically tear each other apart in front of the flashing cameras of the Atlanta press. The elite dynasty she had built on lies, bribery, and cruelty was burning to the ground in a spectacular, fiery public display. Elias and I stood perfectly still amidst the swirling hurricane of absolute destruction. The ballroom had devolved into a frantic circus of screaming socialites and aggressive reporters. Marcus was on his knees trying to pull his furious brother off the shattered floral arrangement, where Chloe lay sobbing in her ruined white maternity dress. Vivian was paralyzed on the marble floor, weeping loudly as her pristine political dynasty burned to ash under the glaring camera flashes. The elite security team Elias brought remained completely stoic, ensuring no one came within 10 feet of us. I looked down at the pathetic scene before me, feeling no pity. They were reaping the devastating harvest they had so ruthlessly sown. Elias gently squeezed my waist, pulling my attention away from the toxic wreckage. "It is time to go home, Sienna," he murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble against the noise. I nodded, leaning into his warm, protective embrace. We turned our backs on the broken family and walked slowly toward the grand brass doors. The journalists instantly parted for us, their cameras flashing wildly to capture the triumphant exit of the woman they had intended to mock. We walked out of the Ritz-Carlton hand in hand, leaving Marcus and his horrific lies behind us forever. One completely transformative year later, I sat comfortably on a plush velvet sofa inside the sprawling sunlit living room of Elias' actual home. The rustic cabin in the woods was a distant, beautiful memory now. Elias lived in a breathtaking modern estate nestled securely on 50 private acres of lush Georgia woodland. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of a private shimmering lake. I looked down at my arms, feeling a profound, radiant joy that still brought happy tears to my eyes. I was holding my 6-month-old twins, Maya and Leo. They were perfectly healthy, beautiful babies, with their father's striking gray eyes and my bright smile. Elias walked into the living room, carrying 2 warm bottles of milk. He had fully embraced his role as a fiercely devoted father, trading his tailored suits for comfortable sweaters when he was home. He kissed my forehead and took Leo from my arms, settling onto the sofa beside me. The peaceful domestic bliss we shared was worth every moment of pain I had endured to get here. My professional life had blossomed just as beautifully as my growing family. With the massive financial backing of the Thorne Medical Group, I had successfully launched the Sienna Thorne Health Foundation. We provided free holistic counseling and comprehensive fertility advocacy for vulnerable women across the entire state of Georgia. I was no longer a discarded ex-wife struggling to keep a small clinic open. I was the proud executive director of a powerful medical charity, ensuring no woman would ever be medically gaslit or emotionally abused the way I had been. Our clinic employed dozens of professionals who genuinely cared about maternal health. Martha, the brave nurse who had given me the original unedited medical files, was now my highly paid chief director of patient advocacy. We had built a pristine, secure environment where truth and compassion guided every single medical decision. I finally had the massive platform and the limitless resources to create genuine, lasting systemic change in the community. As Elias gently fed Leo, I picked up the silver remote and turned on the massive flat-screen television mounted above the marble fireplace. The local Atlanta news channel was running a special anniversary segment on the biggest political scandals of the decade. The familiar, disgraced face of my ex-husband suddenly appeared on the bright screen. I watched with quiet, detached interest as the news anchor detailed the complete, absolute annihilation of Marcus and corrupt family. Following the catastrophic charity gala, Marcus was thoroughly investigated by the State Medical Board and Federal Election Commission. His lucrative law firm had instantly bankrupted, just as Elias promised, leaving him drowning in millions of dollars of insurmountable legal debt. His wealthy campaign donors had sued him for gross financial fraud, completely draining his remaining personal bank accounts. The news footage showed a brief, shaky video clip of Marcus today. He was wearing a cheap, stained uniform, working the drive-through window of a fast food restaurant on the rough industrial outskirts of the city. He looked completely aged, defeated, and entirely broken, all his former arrogant political swagger permanently erased. The news anchor cheerfully added that Chloe and his older brother were currently embroiled in a vicious, highly publicized divorce battle over endless credit card debt and the scandalous paternity revelation. Chloe had been entirely cut off from the family wealth and was currently facing eviction from her luxury condominium. Vivian had been permanently stripped of her elite church council position and was now a social pariah entirely shunned by the wealthy congregation she used to ruthlessly rule. She spent her days hiding inside her rapidly decaying suburban mansion, completely isolated and stripped of her formidable community power. The entire false empire they had built on a foundation of cruel manipulation had crumbled into dust, leaving them all with absolutely nothing but their own toxic, miserable company. They were forced to live every single day with the devastating, brutal consequences of their own unyielding arrogance. I pressed the power button on the remote, letting the television screen fade into silent, peaceful blackness. I did not feel any lingering anger or bitterness toward the people who had tried to destroy me. They were entirely insignificant ghosts from a past life that simply no longer mattered. I looked at Elias, who was smiling warmly down at our sleeping son. I looked at the beautiful baby girl resting safely against my chest. I had walked through absolute fire and emerged with a life more magnificent than I ever could have dreamed. I leaned my head against my husband's shoulder, completely surrounded by fierce, unconditional love. We had finally won peace. The story about Sienna and her profound betrayal and ultimate triumph offers a powerful lesson about the true nature of personal worth and the courage required to reclaim it. For 7 agonizing years, she was trapped in an environment that systematically diminished her value, tying her identity to her perceived flaws and silencing her voice to protect a fragile, toxic ego. The core lesson here is that your worth is never determined by the people who are fundamentally incapable of seeing it. When we remain in environments rooted in manipulation and conditional love, we often internalize the false narratives projected onto us by those who seek to control our reality. This specific journey reminds us that walking away from a toxic family dynamic is not an act of failure or cowardice, but rather an act of profound bravery and personal preservation. It teaches us that we do not have to accept the roles assigned to us by manipulative people who only care about their own social standing. By refusing to quietly accept her public humiliation and choosing to expose the absolute truth, she broke the cycle of abuse and took back her narrative. Furthermore, her unexpected connection with Elias highlights that family is not always defined by marriage contracts, shared bloodlines, or societal expectations. True family is found in the people who stand fiercely by your side during your darkest moments, who offer protection without ulterior motives, and who celebrate your authentic self without conditions. We must learn to clear out the toxic roots from our lives so that healthy new beginnings can flourish. If you have ever felt diminished by the very people who should support you, I urge you to recognize your inherent value and take that brave first step toward building a life that truly honors you.